Thanks a lot for making that work. So you've had a chance to dwell on this, but is that not true? So if we choose to do it by ourselves, sure, we're going to be efficient, we're going to get that thing done. But if we bring some people to the table, can we do it better? Can we do more? I think curriculum mapping really affords us the opportunity to explore that. So by definition, curriculum mapping is a system that thematically aligns assessment, curriculum, and instruction. There's kind of a straightforward, kind of global picture of curriculum mapping, but I maybe like this definition a little bit more from the Kennedy Center, where curriculum mapping is a process for collecting data that identifies the core content, processes, and assessment used in curriculum for each subject area in order to improve communication and instruction in all areas of the curriculum. So there's maybe the key elements, the things that we're going to be talking about here that bring us to the types of outcomes that we're looking for, communication and instruction in all areas of the curriculum. So we're looking at the gaps of the curriculum. Where are things falling out? Where are we not covering things adequately through our curriculum? And I might use this as an example. Perhaps you've seen these slides where this accident occurred. This actually occurred in Utah in 2006. And you can kind of see how the accident followed. If I can find my pointer here, the truck left the embankment here and found itself flipped over to this area right next to this culvert. The driver reports going 55 miles an hour, but the skid marks identify him going probably 80 to 90 miles an hour to make that gap, if you will. But if we look at this, have you seen this before? If we look at this, the embankment is really kind of serious, where that would be a several 100-foot drop. Amazing. They survived. That's the rescue team actually still pulling them out when that shot was taken. And so gaps can be serious, correct? We want to be aware of our gaps. The other advantage in curriculum mapping is that we want to see where things overlap, where we have redundancies in education. Is that not true of concerns that we always say, the students seem to be getting this, and I'm wondering if they already kind of know this information. So looking for those redundancies can be helpful because we are all going different directions, and it's just so easy for us as faculty to find ourselves teaching things that we find very, very important, and we think we're very eloquent to address it, and maybe we just don't recognize it, that somebody has already done this sufficiently for our students. And so instead of trying to get this competition going of who does it best, can we just identify where that's happening and then build on that? And I'll show you some examples of how that can happen if there are areas of redundant education. And then, wouldn't it be nice to find out what do we really do well in our programs? Where are the areas where things just work so well that we call it a zap, and it just really resonates with the students? And then we kind of highlight those, and we maybe look at those as models of how can we do this in other areas where maybe things aren't going quite as well. And so my example of trying to show you what a zap would be like would be looking at how a lightning hits. But let me show you this, and we need to flip to a YouTube that the guys in the back are going to help me with here. So this is one of those monitors. This is in China, and it's just monitoring the traffic that's going outside. And remember, we're looking for lightning strikes, right? So by this report, the camera just happened to catch that, and they were able to come back and watch the film. But it shows us what happens with a lightning strike, too, by report of this video. Yeah, yeah. So do we kind of want to know where those zaps are? This actually has been proven to be false. That was doctored to be able to show that and was acted out, and so don't take your worries too much. But effective in the classroom, right? So if you want to Google lightning strikes twice and show that in your classes, it might get their attention as well. But can we just go back to understanding? It would be great to know where those zaps are and how they're going to occur for us. And so I'd say, in general, those are the purposes of curriculum mapping that become quite effective. So while I was at Union College, the reason we did curriculum mapping is for this reason. The program started with its first graduates in the year 2000. And as you can see, our first group of PANCE scores for first-time test takers, we had a group of about 17 students graduate, and we had a 64% first-time pass rate. We bumped up, this is the national norm, the blue tower here, we bumped up to hovering a little over 80% pretty consistently, and then we took a pretty good drop. We grew to 25 students, and we had 7 students not pass that first time around. Folks, this is shaky territory, and I'm the director of Union College, and we're struggling with how do we deal with this. And so honestly, it was a bit of a point of desperation where we had to do something to figure this out. You know, we can go through the stories of, well, you know, students kind of have some issues after they graduate, and they get into their own troubles, and that can influence how they do on that PANCE, but this points to something else, right? And so I was a bit in a crisis mode where something needed to happen pretty significant, and that's what brought us into curriculum mapping, where do we just sit around and then say, what do we do now? Well, we need a strategy. We need a direction to really head and take us there. And so one of those that I'm sure you apply is can we just kind of cheer the group on and challenge them a little bit more? So there is a nice clip that maybe gives you a model for that as well that we're going to flip to. This is a dad filming his boy, and you might have seen it because it's got quite a bit of traffic. But the boy has just ridden a bike for the first time, and the dad says, is there anything you'd like to say to encourage the folks around? I'm wondering if there we go.
Do you feel alive?
I feel happy of myself.
I feel happy of yourself too. What do you got, any words of wisdom? What about for all the other kids trying to learn how to ride their bike? Can you say anything to them?
Everybody, I know you can believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself, you will know how to ride a bike. If you don't, you just keep practicing. You go get the hang of it, I know it. If you keep practicing, you will get the hang of it, and then you can get better and better at it as you do it.
Give me some thumbs up.
Thumbs up, everybody!
All right.
For rock and roll!
So is that going to work? Thumbs up for rock and roll, PA students. You're going to do all right. You know, so sure, let's be the cheerleaders. Let's be the coaches. You bet. That's a part of our job. But can we be a little bit more strategic? And so I'll share with you that I believe curriculum mapping can really help us with that. So we identified that we had one specific goal for curriculum mapping. We've got to get our PANCE scores improved. And so through that, we were in a place where we could create a new course and add to the curriculum, something we'd already been exploring, and we wanted to call it clinical therapeutics. We had identified in the curriculum that we did pretty well with diagnosis, but the application of treatment therapies seemed to be kind of falling off. And so we built this new course, and we wanted to find out, well, what should we put in this course that really addresses our issues of gaps in the curriculum? So after introducing that course, here's the course we made after that 2004 drop in our PANCE scores. The next class actually did 100% pass rate on their first-time takers. Then we were going through a conversion to the master's degree, so we had no graduates that year. But for the next 4 years after that, we had a pretty consistent performance, much more respectable and much better. Now, I'll be quick to say there were a number of things at play that we put into place, and it's not all due to curriculum mapping, but I think curriculum mapping gave us the road to follow that let us explore in a more strategic way what needed to happen. And what we learned from our curriculum through that process made a pretty significant difference that Union College can be very proud of. So a few other models. This is nothing new to PA education. Has been done around the world in a variety of ways, but I thought you might like to see some examples. University of Hawaii, let's go there, right? But they did a nice curriculum mapping where they just had a key of these 3 areas. So an I would mark areas in their curriculum where a student is introduced to an outcome, R is where it's reinforced, and an M is where mastery is achieved. And so then they create this matrix, which is what you're going to see several times for the rest of the presentation, where the courses are shown here, and then across here are the learning outcomes. And then we just ask the faculty to go through and mark what level do you teach that content. And so at a glance, we can kind of wander through this and see that, well, on this develop laboratory techniques, in the first class, it's introduced. In the second class, it's reinforced. And in the third class, well, it's introduced again. So that would suggest that at that level, they're ready for more, and it doesn't need to be introduced. And so curriculum mapping helps point that out. Another example is this diagram and explain major cellular changes or cellular processes. Here it's introduced, there it's reinforced, and then in a later course reinforced again. Would that be a point where in that 400 level course mastery could be applied, and so students are ready to go further with it. So it's through this process of curriculum mapping that we can identify those areas. Another example is Indiana University, who showed this report of their curriculum mapping technique. So they reversed the axes, if you will. Their courses are listed across the top, and their learning outcomes are here. And maybe what jumps out is this ZZ405, which despite fairly broad learning outcomes, they actually found that that course did not meet any of the learning outcomes that they had for their students. Doesn't mean it's a bad course, it just means it isn't lining up well with the learning outcomes, and that deserves some further exploration. And then curiously, the outcome that is apply ethical principles, none of their courses actually clearly address that. And so it just showed where there were gaps in the curriculum and how they could better maybe revise and rethink about how they're doing their instruction that direction. So let's bring it home. Here's what we did at Union College, and we decided to use the PA core competencies as our matrix. And so those are the 4 organizations, 6 core competencies that we all follow. And so we put those on the matrix, and then we look at our curriculum to say, where do we assess those competencies? And so we use this key, 1 through 7, to show where do we assess the competency by multiple choice exams, where by role-playing, where by essays, where by SOAP notes, where by skills, faculty observations or site visits or oral presentations. So in setting up the matrix, it's very straightforward, right? There's our core competencies, and then we put in the courses. You can put in as many as you want. I'm just giving you a short selection here. And then you just ask the faculty just to fill it out. Put in what type of evaluation you give, and there's the distribution that we showed. Now, that looked really well, and we had several of these charts that we put in our self-study 5 years ago, and it really got some glowing remarks and very impressive. If I can just remind you, there's the key that we're using. So we had all these different points of measure, and we were able to go back and show how that was distributed throughout our curriculum, demonstrating our measure of core competencies. Here's what I haven't told the ARCPA yet. This really meant, well, it is, that's right. This meant very little to our success of our students' outcomes. And I would be quick to say we really didn't have a very clear goal for why to do this. We just kind of did it as an exercise for the self-study. This doesn't measure student performance. This doesn't measure the outcomes of our students. It just measured what did we do to teach and what did we do to assess. And after we got that together, we actually were kind of a little bit frustrated and saying, well, what does that really mean? And I would ask you to be very careful as you walk through this to make sure you have a very clear goal for why are we doing this, so it doesn't become a futile effort that could take some time. So let's be a little bit more practical about it. Here we were looking at PANCE scores, right? And we wanted to see how do we better do our PANCE scores. And so let's take our courses and let's look at how students are performing in our courses. And so there, over 3 years of students, we have the mean score for each course. So not surprisingly, we see anatomy at an 88.7, clinical path, and pharmacology a little bit more rigorous, so a little bit lower mean scores. Applied medical ethics, everybody does pretty well in our ethics courses. They're not pretty typical. And so can we then add the PANCE score by a correlation? So we use Pearson's correlation coefficient. Don't get caught up in the statistics. If that boggles you, there's statisticians on your campus or nearby in your communities that can help with this. But it's a very simple, straightforward process. SPSS can pull this together. And those are the values that we have. Now, just to be sure you understand, if it's a correlation coefficient of greater than 0.5, that suggests there is a relationship, a large relationship. Not cause and effect, but a relationship. If it's over 0.3, it's a medium effect. And so from looking at that, we got to do the statistical analysis as well. So let's put in, make sure we have the statistical significance to see what's of value there. And then we can find that, well, applied medical ethics, although students are really doing well in ethics, it doesn't have a very high correlation with PANCE. Intuitively, that makes sense, right? That's maybe what we expect. PANCE isn't supposed to test necessarily those qualities. We looked at human anatomy as a pretty key course for us, and it had a 4.65. As a correlation, but the strongest ones were clinical pathophysiology, and the very strongest one was our pharmacology class of all things. Had the highest predictive value of how students perform on PANCE. And so that gives us a little bit of a sense of what the Union College curriculum is like. I'm not sure if that's true for your program. We're going to look at UNMC in just a minute. But we were also wondering, as I'm sure you wonder, you know, it could be our curriculum, but are we getting the right students? Are we getting the students that are going to be able to be successful on PANCE? And what's our best predictors of that? We look at the admission requirements, right? And we look at what kind of measures we have. So we did the same study, and we took the total GPA of our student population at the time of application. And we did a comparison of how did those students, based on their GPA, what's the correlation to how they did in these courses? And so here, how they performed in the course, the total GPA 2.39. Well, let's put up the statistical analysis, too, so we can see what's significant. So everything's at some level significant, but clinical pathophysiology and pharmacology show as the winners there, that those courses are as for the admission GPA, does serve as a good predictor of their performance in those key classes, which are also our key classes for PANCE. And so it does give us some kind of a margin of do you believe your GPAs? Are we worried about grade inflation? Sure. Can you say in your program that you understand that the GPA can be predictive? At Union College, we were able to go there a little bit. Well, as you get the science GPA from CASPA, we do as well. And so let's see how science GPA works. Would you expect it to be a little better, a little higher correlation, or a little bit lower? Intuitively, you'd think a little bit higher. But in each case, sometimes losing statistical significance, the science GPA on our study of Union College admission applicants actually showed a lower rate than on the total GPA. And so the total GPA actually served as a better measure of performance in our courses, especially key courses that led to student performance on PANCE. Hold that, because we're going to be looking at another institution in just a minute. So with Union, from that curriculum mapping exercise, we were able to say that pharmacology is a strong predictor of student performance on the PANCE. We're able to show that the entering science GPA is actually a lower predictor than the overall GPA. And students have a higher performance in ethics, but we have to agree that it doesn't correlate well with how students go on PANCE. So when I came to University of Nebraska, they also had a little blip on PANCE scores. And they've had several years in a row of 100% pass rate for all their students. But in the midst of that, there's been some growth of the program, and there's been some faculty attrition and some open spots. And there were a little lower performance on PANCE in the last couple of years. It was quick to point out that, you know, we're stretched, and we've got too many students, and we don't have enough faculty, and so obviously that's a concern. But taking it through this matrix was a little bit more helpful for us, so we just did the same thing at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So there's 4 courses. We did them all, but I just picked out this selection to show you some differences. So anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and then our adult and pediatric medicine part 2 course of that. So again, not surprisingly, you'll see that the overall performance on that course is 299. This is over 7 years of graduates that we had the data for. So again, doing Pearson's correlation analysis and getting the statistical significance built in there, we were able to identify that anatomy was pretty high at 0.508 as a predictor of PANCE, a little bit different than our experience at Union College. And physiology was also a high predictor, and then look at adult and pediatric medicine, which is hopefully what we think. That's going to be a pretty significant predictor. And the fallout there was pharmacology quite a bit lower, where at Union College it was the higher one. So based on the years of data that we had at the University of Nebraska, where this data has been collected, you collect it year by year, let's look at it. And it's not that difficult to do. We had the privilege at University of Nebraska Medical Center of actually hiring a data person, Ryan Wessel, who's sitting out here, who helped us put that information together. A guy who loves PAs, but he's not a PA. So it doesn't require a PA to do this, and it can be really helpful if you're in a place where you can pull some of that data together. So just out of curiosity, we looked at those admission factors as well. Are they predictive at the University of Nebraska for performance in those courses? And here the total GPA showed this variation. Again, the statistical significance is important to look at. But we again see the values of those courses are very similar, where physiology has the highest predictive value. Anatomy is next, and then pharmacology actually still falls out a little bit lower. And our adult and pediatric medicine is not nearly as highly predictive based on the total GPA. The total GPA doesn't give us a good sense of that. So the science GPA, what we found at Union was it was not quite as predictive as the total GPA for admissions. And if we look at this at each point, science GPA is just a little bit lower on their correlation coefficient compared to the total GPA. Here the difference isn't much, and I would be quick to say that that's probably not a lot to hold a difference to. Pharmacology actually shows a little bit stronger, right? I would still suggest to us that maybe that's something your institution would want to explore. How much weight do you put on the science GPA as you're making your decisions on your applicants? How do you compare that to the total GPA with that information? How do you feel like that flies in the midst of what we perceive as different institutions grading differently? I don't have a slide on this, but I'll give you a quick shot that we at University of Nebraska asked for GRE scores as well. And our studies have shown that the GRE score is actually the better predictor than the GPA for how students are going to perform in their program. That may not be true for your institution because of differences there, but that's true for us, and that became a little bit more insightful for some of our meetings, discussion over the admissions applicants. So at UNMC, we found that even though adult and pediatric clinical medicine was one of the lower performing courses for our students, it's a strong predictor, our best predictor of student performance. The science GPA is marginally a lower predictor, maybe not a significant deal, but we really can't say that science GPA is a high predictor, pharmacology being the exception there. And then pharmacology is a lower predictor of PANCE than the other courses that we have there. So I would say this may differ institution to institution. So please don't run home and say, well, this is how it works, because that may not be the case at your institution until you take a look at it. I just hope you can say, we can do this. It's not that difficult.
I know it's not in your presentation, but just curious if you ran the data on the PACRAT.
Hold on just a minute. So we did find that to be interesting. Boy, can I give him a couple bucks here at the end of this? So we did say, because PANCE is kind of important in our study, what else do we do to measure student performance in their preparation for PANCE? And so let's walk through this because it's a little bit busy, but we broke it down by the organ systems of PANCE. And so this is the cardiovascular questions, or the reports that we get. And so on PACRAT, they have 36 questions that identify the cardiovascular system. And then we do a comprehensive exam with our students, and that's what they take for a grade, right? PACRAT we don't use for a grade, it's just a self-assessment. And so there's 58 cardiovascular questions on the comprehensive exam. And so I'll just own this. Let's look at this real quick. Here's the blue tower of our PANCE, and as I already implicated to you, we've had a little bit of a downward trend on our student performance on PANCE over these last couple of years. But then let's pull out the red bar, and the red bar shows pretty significant drops that are almost opposite to the student performance on PANCE. Now, that could get construed to say PACRAT's just a poor predictor. But you could argue that when the students perform poorly on PACRAT, did that shake their tree? Did that make them say, I better do something so that we got our highest performance? And at a point where PACRAT maybe went a little bit better for students, did it not really encourage them as well to get prepared for PANCE? I'm making an assumption. We don't have data to support that, but rather than saying PACRAT doesn't mean anything, I wonder if PACRAT actually means quite a bit to our students. We only offer PACRAT a single time, and so it's 3 months before they graduate. Then our comprehensive exam, which the students take for a grade, is maybe a little more predictive and follows along. So again, just through that SPS system, we can get the correlation analysis down for this, where the PACRAT scored a .428 for cardiovascular questions, and our comprehensive exam actually we found was a better predictor of the students, and it did meet that quota of a 0.5 mark of being a strong effect. So that was cardiovascular. That's where the majority of PANCE exam questions are. And the next level is pulmonology, right? So we took a look at pulmonology the same way. And so if we look at the blue towers, again, we see this drop in our students' performance on that pulmonology exam overall. And then PACRAT has 27 questions. Our comprehensive exam has 43 questions. And really kind of the same story, right? PACRAT drops. And student performance actually a little bit higher. Look at this. The PACRAT was a pretty high performance here, and our PANCE performance was one of the lower performances over those years of study. And so PACRAT can lull us to sleep perhaps a little bit. I'm making an assumption there. Then we also look at our own comprehensive exam, perhaps you have them as well, and pretty significant correlation, although at times the students did better on our comprehensive exam than they actually did on PANCE, and that raises up some questions that we should be looking at as well. Yes, sir?
What's the time frame between the PACRAT given and the comprehensive exam given?
Ryan, do you remember?
3 months, 2 months?
Yeah, the comprehensive exam is at the end of the curriculum, and I think PACRAT is about 3 months.
Yeah, so PACRAT is about 6 months from PANCE. Comprehensive exam is about 3 months out from PANCE.
So the question was, what's the time frequency for the recording that we're making of offering the comprehensive exam and PACRAT? PACRAT is offered earlier than the comprehensive exam, which is towards the end of the curriculum. Again, we did the item analysis, or to get Pearson's correlation, and so we see that PACRAT for pulmonology actually has a low, if even any type of relationship there, based on predicting performance on PANCE. Remember what question that we're asking. And our comprehensive exam was 0.4, so a little bit stronger. So then just to parallel how PACRAT performs compared to the comprehensive exam, hopefully this just graph shows you that it doesn't make much sense, right? The two do not line up very well together if we're looking for those predictive factors for PANCE. But I would be quick again to say that doesn't mean PACRAT isn't effective. Perhaps it even was significantly effective in motivating our students to study. So we found that the comprehensive exam is a stronger predictor than PACRAT for our purposes in looking back. The year-by-year fluctuations of PACRAT in the comp exam then is misleading, and it's hard then for our students to maybe grapple with what does this mean when I don't do well on PACRAT and I do well on the comprehensive exam. So we need to do a little better job with our students in helping them interpret what those two values could be as they prepare for graduation. And then we would argue that the course performance indicators were actually quite high, higher correlation coefficient than we had in either of those comprehensive exams. And so perhaps blending that information together to say, let's look at how you did in adult and pediatric medicine, and let's combine that together with how you did on the comprehensive exam, and then we'll get kind of a picture of how you're going to do. Without being able to do curriculum mapping, without being able to take a study of data that you have, you just plug it into these formulas and these matrices, we weren't able to advise that counsel to our students. I'd just be so quick to say, this doesn't mean this is how it will work in your program. You need to look at your own program and make that determination. But what are the key points in your curriculum that can guide you that direction? That would be helpful for all of us to know. So yeah, it's time consuming, but do we go farther if we do curriculum mapping? It's not going to work unless we know what we're heading towards. And so don't make the mistake that I made in measuring something that we really can't do anything with. The mapping formats can vary greatly. If you do get the handouts for this, I've put several copies of samples of different types of maps in the back of that handout that you can just look at on your own and see how that would formulate for you. And then I would say that sometimes the person who puts the tool together may not find it as helpful as the person who actually created it. And that's the challenge of some of the products that are out there, where make sure the product that you're using is really going to be effective for you, and that takes a little bit of work. So it would even be my advice to say first you dabble into this yourself before necessarily just going out and buying the product. That may not be the case. Perhaps you've already got the product, so good for you. But if you have the luxury of time to do that, you may find that doing some simple studies like this more guides you to what type of curriculum mapping you're going to be interested in. So what we find is that if we do curriculum mapping effectively, those outcomes will reduce our meeting time on details. There are just a number of questions that can be answered, so that instead of hashing over ideas at those staff meetings that we have, we can more so relate it to the data and then kind of move ourselves forward a little bit more efficiently. New teachers, having them plugged into curriculum mapping from the beginning, they just immediately can start to see those trends and start to get some measurements of how they're doing in their curriculum right off the bat. The value of instruction becomes more clear, and then we can communicate that effectiveness to other agencies that are looking at us, especially perhaps accreditation. Colorado State University did a nice paper on this that's in the reference that I have for you. What they found is that their curriculum mapping, although their faculty was somewhat reluctant to this, they did find that the faculty started working together and started sharing their data back and forth a little bit more. And so even though some reluctance to begin with, it turned out to be some excellent collaboration that arose. Some new ideas were popped up, and look at this, their faculty prepared joint presentations at 3 national conferences based on their excitement as they got plugged into that, and that could be the case at your institution as well. And so there's different measures you want to use. This is what we're looking at now at the University of Nebraska, is can we continue to look at the PANCE blueprint and use that as a measure? Can we look at our professional competencies and then our own PA program goals? Can we measure those out and kind of broaden that scope of where curriculum mapping can take us? So the steps, I would just remind you, please establish a goal first. Then we're going to go to looking at what's going to best measure that goal, to measure the standards that we have, correct the data by creating a matrix, apply the matrix to each course, and then pull that information together to bring together the whole curriculum. So we're seeking you to develop and achieve those goals for the curriculum. Those learning outcomes based on the student is important, so maybe your language should be that the students demonstrate, or the students represent, or the students produce. Those are the types of language that you want to see for those outcomes. And then finding where those connections are happening. Where do the goals be congruent with the student learning objectives, and that are then congruent with the outcomes that we're measuring, and being able to really highlight those are very helpful and make your curriculum likely more successful. So there's the references, and I encourage you again that if you want to grab the handout that we have that's going to be posted for you, you'll see some examples of mapping. Here's some ideas of how you can put the PANCE standards across the top and then list your classes and work it through that direction. And it's just simple matrices that you really can design on your own. You've been very attentive for this time of the morning, and I appreciate everybody staying awake here. But I'd like to engage some questions or comments that you may have, experiences that you've had with curriculum mapping, including products that you may be using. So can we open this up? Do we need a microphone for questions, or I'll try to repeat them? It looks like they're bringing a microphone up here. But who'd like to share something? Yes, up here.
I just wanted to say that I was kind of impressed with earlier on where you showed that you actually mapped your assessments. Most of the time what we do is we map our curriculum content. So I thought the mapping of assessments was something that I've never seen anyone do before. I don't know what the audience experiences with that. So what was your feeling on how successful mapping assessments is versus mapping course content in terms of looking at whatever the goals mapping?
Sure. So he asked about the mapping of assessments that we did that I kind of poo-pooed. He sees some value to that, and he wonders if you would feel that way too, especially compared to mapping content. And so I would even relate it to that mapping of content to say, where did we introduce it? where did we reinforce it and where did we master it. The mapping of assessment, because of those styles of assessment, showed us the depth of assessment, which suggested the depth of learning. And so although I made fun of myself a little bit, yes, I'd say there's value to that, where we really could track where did we assess this by a multiple choice exam, which likely is primarily recall. Where did we assess this by actual observation or by maybe an essay or something that shows a little bit more of effective thinking skills. And to be able to demonstrate that in areas where we assessed multiple ways, that would suggest that we were maybe a little bit more intentional on measuring that value than something that just popped up with 1 or 2 assessments. So I think there is value to that from that perspective.
Did you find that assessment mapping was a better predictor than content mapping?
You know, I would have to speak of that off the cuff a little bit, because we didn't ever measure it the other way. But our intention was that, yes, that this would be, rather than just checking a box to say we taught it, can we check a box to say we measured that we taught it? And in my mind, that's maybe a better measure. Comments, questions again? Somebody with Typhon out there, I'd like to hear from you if you're there. Sure. Oh, okay.
Usually get, but as a didactic coordinator, I don't find it really gets the information that I need to know.
Well, I want to be careful that we're not trying to advertise anything, but I would repeat it for the recording that this institution's using it, but she's the didactic coordinator, and she says she's not finding it quite effective. That deserves you to look at it on its own merits, but thanks for sharing. I think that's helpful to hear.
We use e-curriculum, and they have a mapping where you're supposed to match things, but they're taking it to, I don't know if anybody else is using it, they're taking it to so many detailed points that it's become incredibly cumbersome. I mean, I've just started doing it, and talk about work, it's far more significant than this. I mean, it drops it down to so many levels, it's very difficult.
Yeah, the load of information that's required in most of those products is pretty significant at the front end, where they're actually asking you to identify every objective in each course, let alone objectives throughout the program, and then identifying how to measure those throughout. Would that be something similar? And that's pretty laborious. And I'd encourage you that this is pretty straightforward, and it may trigger you to say, I'm ready to move ahead. Actually, we just bought into the Typhon curriculum mapping this semester, and we haven't got to it yet, so I can't speak to it, but come back next year, maybe we'll talk about that one.
Just a little more of a detailed question. If we go to our data analysis person and say, this gentleman said, use a Pearson's correlation analysis, here's the PANCE scores, you have them all, can you give me a PANCE correlation to our pharmacology class? Will they know what we're talking about? Will they know what numbers to pull out?
I truly believe they will.
Okay,
and
so they know what numbers to give us these statistical.
It is not that difficult or mathematically confusing to someone who has some knowledge about statistical analysis. So you're exactly right. They need to see student performance in courses, and they need to see your PANCE data. And from that raw data, it's a pretty straightforward process. I have done it myself. For my dissertation, I did it. But now I turn it over to more capable hands by having someone who knows what they're doing do it.
Can you just speak to why you decided to go to Typhon or to a curriculum mapping program in general?
Sure. So we're already plugged into Typhon for data gathering for our clinical rotation experience, and have had really great success with that data. So they have offered, and it's fairly affordable, and I was able to write a grant through our university system that allowed us to pay for it as a test for the first year. So because of such a kind of a straightforward process, I thought we should try it, and I just wanted to kind of have some experience with it to try it out. I would say our faculty is quite reluctant to jump into it to that level. This has been very informative, and we're all a little concerned about, is this going to become a little consuming time-wise? But we're going to give it a swing. Yes, sir.
As regards the use of the statistician, I would also encourage people to use them earlier rather than later. because they can help you decide what data you need and how to collect it in order to answer the questions you want to answer.
Excellent point. I want to repeat it because I thought it was so good, but I won't do that for the sake of you can hear it as well. I would just relate that in my dissertation 5 years ago, I was reluctant again to thinking they were going to talk over my head and scare me away and make it all awkward. And when I got there, they actually said, gee, you know, would you mind if we just took this data and we're going to take it through a little different pathway and we think we can get you a little tighter results? And wow, I mean, it was very, very helpful. So if I had gone to them on the early end saying, hey, we're looking at measuring a couple of things, that's what they love, right? That's what any statistician or data manager to help organize the data. So you're exactly right. Good point.
Were you able, just with the level of mapping that you've shown, were you able to actually make some changes in either your program at Union or Nebraska, or do you need to go to the deeper level, the Typhon level? Did you feel like even that information was enough for you to make some changes?
It actually was very, very effective and zeroed in exactly on where we needed to. Those redundancies really popped up, and we were able to identify that there were areas where, hey, you don't have to give that lecture in your course because it's happening over here. And the faculty would say, great, because I have other things I'd like to do at that time. And sometimes there was discussions on who should keep it or not, but it was easily understood. The gaps were the big thing, I think, at Union College particularly, where we found some pretty significant gaps to say, wow, we just didn't see that nobody was covering this. And we wouldn't have found that without curriculum mapping. And then we could really zero in to say, for that new course, let's put that in there. Now, I know you don't have the luxury always of creating a new course. That's an unusual situation. But to find out where there may be some trade-off areas, certainly that could be effective. You've been a great audience. Thanks for your time. Enjoy your morning.